In this podcast, we discuss unsolved cases that may be violent in nature in an effort to keep the cases in the public eye and continue the stories of the victims. Those who choose to or choose against participating are not indicative of involvement in any crimes we discuss. Listener discretion is advised. While we likely don't all agree with our thoughts on the person or people who committed this crime, we can certainly all agree that Jody Kilgore was a victim. He was a victim of a horrifying crime that stripped away his opportunity and ability to continue his service to his community and love his family. But what risk factors made him a victim? Today, we'll discuss his characteristics and environments in an effort to determine Jody's victimology profile, as well as dig deeper into rumors and theories. This is Tragedy, a true crime podcast.
All right, well, welcome to Tragedy. I'm Michael.
And I'm Elisa.
And we have a couple of updates that we want to talk about before we kick this episode off. To begin with, we have heard from the sheriff's office now, and that's a great thing. We heard from Captain Srirachi, and he let us know that he's got our messages, that he knows about the podcast, and that he's looking forward to listening, and that if we have any questions moving forward, he would be a great resource to reach out to.
We also heard that they are in good communication with Gladys and had recently just sat down with Gladys and her family to give them some updates about some leads that had come in and some things that they were following. And we also do want to take a moment to apologize that we were saying the captain's name incorrectly. We were saying sriracha, like sriracha sauce, but after speaking with him, we know it is srirachi. He's totally he gets it, he understands it. If you see the way it looks, it doesn't even pronounce that way. And he actually said different parts of his family pronounce it differently. So I think we've been given some grace.
Yeah, this is something he's used to.
Yeah, I would agree. Let's refresh on the 4 motives for murder, the ones that we talked about in the last episode.
Okay.
Remember the 4 L's?
I do.
Yes. And those were lust and love and loathing and loot. We're going to come back to those when we refresh and check out some of these rumors and theories, go a little deeper. But I also want to talk about victimology. So according to a 2007 article by Carola Dillenberg in the International Journal of Behavior Consultation and Therapy, victimology is, quote, a study of why certain people are victims of crime and how lifestyles affect the chances a person will fall victim to a crime. So there's 2 sides of victimology.
Okay.
There's the positive side, the protective factors, what might protect someone from becoming a victim, and then there's the risk factors. So we're going to talk about both of those, but we're going to start with the protective factors specific to Jody as we know them. So the protective factors are things that serve to protect a person or make them less likely to become a victim of crime. And we have 3, there are several protective factors, but when I looked into this and we were talking about it, there were 3 protective factors that we feel really apply to Jody, things that protect him for being less likely to be a victim. And those
We're going to apologize for that sound in the background.
Oh.
That'll be Gary scratching the wall.
Hey, buddy.
It's his scratching wall. So anyway, in case I can't filter that out.
All right. Protective factor number 1. And now, again, there are a lot. So I just pulled out the 3 that I think really apply to Jody as we know it, is the stability of his family. And this relates more to Gladys, Robin, his siblings. And so we talked to Robin. You guys listened to that in one of our first episodes. I think it was episode 2. Seems like they had a really stable family.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that, well, there's a couple things to consider. First, we hear about no one really had a bad thing to say about him. So let's start there. And then we start talking about, during Robin's interview, her relationship with him and that he was a jokester, I think is what she said. And, there's lots of conversations that happen around that, and, with Cindy as well. We were certainly given the impression that this was a relatively tight-knit group and that they had a lot of mutual respect for each other. Even Jody, in some cases, would consider kind of the favorite. And as a result, we're just not seeing a family dynamic here that's too problematic.
So that's a thing positive, right? This is a
Right.
positive protective factor. Another protective factor is not being directly involved in unlawful behavior.
Yeah. And, as we've covered before, we acknowledge the fact that, we know that Jody smokes some pot occasionally. We know that. We also know that anytime we've had various conversations around drugs, while we do get other names but on both sides of the family, we don't typically hear his name in this same association.
No. Mm-hmm. And then the third thing that really stood out for me as a protective factor that relates to Jody is self-esteem. And you already kind of hit on it.
Sure.
Like, he was a jokester. We've heard several people in the community say he was very helpful. He would drop anything. We don't
Turn
hear
off
about
his back is the word that was used.
Yeah, we don't hear anything about depression. He was fun-loving, went out and did fishing. And so
Right.
I don't know that we've heard any evidence that he didn't have a positive self-esteem. In fact, I would think it was the other.
I would agree with
Got
that.
good self-esteem. Now, let's take a look at risk factors. We're going to approach this one in the same way. There are quite a few, I think 10 or 15 different risk factors. I pulled out the 3 that I think really apply to Jody. So there's several risk factors that can make an individual vulnerable to becoming a victim of crime. Vulnerability is what we're talking about, and I've narrowed it down to basically these 3. The first one is socioeconomic status. So a person's ranking on the socioeconomic ladder, we can say, can be a protective factor or it can be a vulnerability. And in this case, we see it more as a vulnerability.
Yeah, we certainly know that they weren't in the best financial shape. I'm not sure to what level, but we know that Jody had closed down the business and he was doing basically odd jobs or even electrical jobs, but not really doing it under the umbrella of that LLC. We know that Susan's career doesn't exactly lend itself to a very high level of pay rate.
Right. Let's be honest. Educators don't really make a lot of money. And she's a preschool teacher. Admirable work. We need to have people in front of kids as they're at that really young age. Does not pay well.
Correct. And so it's easy to understand here that from a socioeconomic standpoint, they're probably not at a very good level.
So that we would say is a vulnerability area for Jody. The second area of vulnerability, we're coming back to it again.
Was it drugs?
It's drugs.
Okay,
yes.
So,
drug use, drug involvement, distribution, those kinds of things.
And just like I said earlier, while Jody wasn't directly involved with anything that was too significant in the stories we've come across, lots of people around Jody were involved and on both sides of the family. We've got an understanding with some of the sisters, or maybe one of the sisters. Her name was Lucia, and she was involved in drugs, and it's my understanding that she was heavily involved in drugs.
I don't know that we've talked about Lucia before. Can you tell us who she is?
Yeah, she was, from my perspective, she was one of my other aunts. She was, I believe, half sisters with Susan, full sister with Brenda, and I don't have a ton of memories with her, but unfortunately, one of my last memory, I should say, is really not a great one with Lucia. I was 16 or 17 years old. I was driving down the road and I saw her and I recognized her. She was walking along the road right near Capitol Circle and where Crawfordville Highway crosses. And she looked like she was just broken down. Well, I pulled over and very quickly I realized that she was either intoxicated or high, and she was working her way back to her car, or to a gas station, because she had run out of gas or something had happened to her car. I pulled over. I offered to help her. She wanted me to help her get back to her car, get some gas, and I could tell there was a problem. So I looked at her and said, well, I'm not going to help you back to your car. I will help you home. And she did not want to go home. She wanted to go back to her car. I tried to push the issue with her. She got very upset with me. She basically told me to go screw myself. And I told her, I'm like, well, I'm willing to help you, but I'm only going to take you home. I'm not putting you back in a vehicle. And I got the finger pretty much. And that is literally the last memory of Lucia that I have.
Mm-hmm. And so we have this vulnerability of drug use just swirling around Jody, both in his side of the family and in Susan's side of the family. So this is a really important vulnerability area as we see it.
Right.
Now, we talked about the stability of Jody's family in terms of Robin and his sisters as being a protective factor. But we also have to acknowledge stability of the family as far as his marriage as being a pretty significant vulnerability. We know from the neighbor that he heard screaming, and one of the theories is maybe he didn't do anything because there was a lot of fighting going on.
It was a common occurrence to happen.
Right, with the property. We know that Susan and Jody had been separated for a little while. In our last episode, I think we talked about a reconciliation. In the past week or so, we've heard that maybe that isn't the right word, that while he had moved back in, maybe it wasn't really a reconciliation. And so we feel like these three areas of vulnerability, socioeconomic status, drug use, drug involvement, and familial stability are all things that we need to consider as vulnerabilities. And I do want to say this area of victimology, if this is something you're really interested in, I would strongly encourage that you listen to the podcast, The Consult. This is 3 people who used to work in the behavior analysis unit and were profilers. And they're retired from the FBI. And these people are experts in victimology. So if you're really thinking this is really cool and we're thinking about what might lend someone to become a victim, I really encourage you to listen to that. They profile the JonBenet Ramsey case, the Israel Keys case, the Zodiac killer. There's lots of really interesting cases, I think, in that podcast, if that's something you're interested in listening to. Did you want to say anything else about vulnerabilities?
No, I don't think so.
All right. So with all that said, we want to be careful here because it's important that when we talk about victimology, we don't ever want to give the impression that someone who has a high risk of victimology means it's their fault. That's not what we're saying at all. Rather, we are considering the field of behavior analysis to explore Jody's risk level. So there's 5 levels of risk when we think about victimology. It goes from mild to moderate to elevated to severe and to extreme. So it's our opinion that Jody's victimology risk level was moderate. And we think that mostly because of this constant coming back to the drugs. And we're not just talking about marijuana and weed. We're talking about much more significant drugs.
Yeah, we've got evidence of, connections to crack cocaine. We've got evidence of cocaine. We've got evidence of meth. You had another one that you had mentioned in a previous episode.
Right. Ecstasy. Ecstasy is also something that has come up in terms of some specific people. Not across the board, but it's been named with certain people.
Okay.
So in conclusion, we feel like Jody's victimology risk level is moderate. So the first theory that we're going to go back to is our theory about drugs and the involvement of drugs in Jody's homicide. So as a quick refresher, in episode 4, we discussed the history of substance abuse in the family. We've already hit on it a little bit today, not just weed, but a lot of other things. We talked about, we'll call it the Walgreens incident, where several people were arrested at the Walgreens for attempting to acquire Sudafed. And unfortunately, things worse than Sudafed were found in their vehicle. We also discussed some folks who went to jail, some folks who were arrested. Remember, we're being really careful in this section to not use names. We want to be sensitive to that, but we know that members of Jody's family were arrested and charged with possession of meth, and that's where the ecstasy came in. It also is pretty common that drugs come up in the conversation.
Yeah, and to add on, again, to the recap, we've stumbled across when and why dogs were brought in. And what we found is not only were dogs brought in at Jody's location, granted, weeks later from what we heard, they were also brought somewhere else. And there's a property that's associated with the Kilgore family where they was suspected of drug deals or drug activity happening, and the dogs were also taken to this location for that purpose.
Yeah, we understand that the canines were not run on the property because, of course, you would have to have probable cause or a warrant for that. But they were run fairly close to the property line in a location where we've been told that drug deals were happening. So that's just another piece of evidence that we have that kind of sits in the drugs are possibly involved in this.
Drugs are part of the story, potentially part of the story.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
The second theory was infidelity and how that may have played a role. And what's interesting about this theory is after episode 4 released, we heard from a number of listeners, and they felt that we weren't taking this particular theory seriously enough, or we were discounting it too much to being related. So we did some more research and we really listened to their feedback, and something really jumped off the page that was brought up, and that was the Mike Williams case.
Yeah, so I did a little research on this, and we actually even we found it on YouTube, right? It was a 48 Hours episode. It's called Cold-Blooded Killer.
Yeah, we'll link it in the description.
Yeah. So basically what happened was in the early morning hours of December 16th of 2000, Mike Williams, a 31-year-old real estate appraiser and devoted father, he went out to Lake Seminole, which I assume you've probably been to.
I have many times.
So this is a case that is going to be very familiar to quite a few of our listeners. And this guy, Mike Williams, he was going duck hunting. Well, he didn't come back. So a search was launched and they found his boat. And if you watch the show, they actually show pictures of the actual boat. And you can see it kind of across I would call it a moat, but I guess Lake Seminole's
Since it's Lake Seminole's pretty swampy.
Yeah. So you can see where the launch is, and then you can see this abandoned boat kind of across the way. And they talked to some of the detectives who actually did the search efforts, and they used these boats, and was it long PVC pipes?
It was really a PVC pipe that they were pushing around in the swamp itself. And the way he described it was, if it hits something solid, it's a log. If it's something a little bit spongy, it's most likely a body.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so he said, they used the typical grid pattern, and they did this for quite a while, but they didn't find anything. And so what they decided is that he had fallen off his boat for whatever reason, tipped the boat, and that he had been eaten by alligators.
That was the theory.
Right. And so with this working theory, his wife at the time, Denise, was able to actually have a death certificate issued without a body. But what was really interesting is the way this happened was, I think it was 6 months after he disappeared, his waders and his fishing jacket, and it was his hunting license.
Yes.
Just poof, appeared. Like the waders just appeared in the same general area where they had found the boat 6 months after he had disappeared / been eaten by alligators.
Right. And that gave the insurance companies what they needed to issue her payment for life insurance. But law enforcement looked at this and they kind of went, well, wait a second. The waders are in too good a condition.
Mm-hmm.
The materials in general were in better condition. than they should have been after sitting there for 6 months. So it actually made the situation even more suspicious.
But it allowed this death certificate to be issued, and then she collected a $1.75 million life insurance payment. 3 separate life insurance payments or certificates, is that what it's called? A life insurance policy, one of which was issued by his good friend. So now we're going to fast forward to 2017.
So it was 18 years later.
And in the interim, what has happened is this good friend, his name was Brian, the one who was the life insurance guy. And actually, Brian and his wife and Mike, the person who disappeared, and his wife, Denise, were friends. They went out and did stuff together, all 4 of them. Well, after Mike disappeared, Brian gets divorced, and Brian and Denise, Mike's widow, they got married. So that was a little suspect, I think. And they were married for several years, enjoying this life insurance policy.
Was it 3 years?
I think it might have been longer than that. I don't remember exactly. It was a little while. Well, things started going downhill between Brian and Denise, and he assaulted her. And he got arrested. And what they don't show you in the show, so, spoiler alert, he cut a little deal with them before they sentenced him for that assault, and he spilled the beans. He told the law enforcement that he had actually killed Mike.
And describe where his body was so it could be discovered.
That's right. And because of that, he got a little, deal in his sentencing for the assault of her. And he threw her under the bus. He said that she wasn't there, but they had talked about it. This was the whole plan. And she ended up getting convicted of first-degree murder. However, her first-degree murder sentence was overturned. Her conspiracy to commit murder conviction was upheld. So, there are some, obviously it's not the exact same story, but what we're talking about is a story that was solved after 18 years. Mm-hmm. That was a long time. We have a story where we have some infidelity happening.
Yeah, it was found out that, they had been seeing each other for many years prior to Mike's murder.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Another similarity is that she had cut off, Denise, the widow, had cut off all communication with the family after he disappeared / got eaten by the alligators. And she would not let anyone her child or anybody see anyone in his family. Totally cut them off. Didn't communicate with them, which is kind of a parallel to what's happening, at least with you. This is your family, and they're not talking to you.
Yeah, it's not just a question of me, but my side of the family is they are not communicating with, the Kilgore side of the family as far as Jody's side. There's definitely been a rift that's been created as a result of this. Now, granted, I heard things weren't great before. This certainly didn't make things better. And there's a number of other parallels. There was one, champion of the entire story, and that was Mike's mom. And when I saw that part of the show, I instantly thought of Gladys. So there's another parallel. We have an insurance payment that I've heard was part of something that was in this story, that there was an insurance policy that was collected upon Jody's death.
And then there's one last thing that really came to our attention as we were watching this story about Mike Williams, and I'm going to call it the popular theory.
Sure.
So in the Mike Williams case, the popular theory, what most people chalked it up to was that he fell off his boat and he was eaten by an alligator. Most people thought that that's what happened. Obviously, the court thought that's what happened. They issued a death certificate. Except for his mom, who you just talked about. She never believed that that was the case. And then as the story progressed, we had several scientists and experts who said alligators are not going to eat a whole body in December. I'm not from Florida. I don't know about alligators.
That's
but
fairly accurate.
This seems pretty accurate. And that ended up not being the case. And so the connection that we started thinking about to Jody's case is there seems to be what I'll call a, quote, popular theory around one person, one specific person's involvement and responsibility in this case. And I think if you took 10 people who knew something about this case, probably 7 or 8 would say, it's Toby. It's the business partner. He's the one who did it. It's the popular theory.
And we've even discussed in previous episodes, just with the information that we have. Now, granted, let's acknowledge there's things that law enforcement has right now that we don't have. I'm talking about what we do know. What we do know already makes it really difficult for it to be Toby.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. So we went through this Mike Williams case and we just drew some connections to Jody's homicide. And really that's all spurring from the feedback that we got from you all about how we sort of glossed over infidelity as being a contributing factor to this homicide or being somehow involved with it.
So you're saying like the infidelity and drugs are now kind of neck and neck. Is that what you're saying, Elisa?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't really have infidelity as its own even theory. We talked about Susan and potentially her involvement as a theory. And we sort of said, oh, maybe infidelity had something to do with it. And since then, people let us know that it probably potentially had a little bit more to do with it than maybe we had discussed it. And that's why we wanted to tease this out a little more.
Yeah, and we'll be covering this a bit more later because what's happened over the last couple of days is we've had a number of people, again, the listeners that reached out that challenged us on this theory or not taking this theory as seriously and provided a lot more details that, we're going to have to look at before we can talk about them on this podcast.
But that's coming up, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
All right. Despite extensive investigations by the Wakulla County Sheriff's Office and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, no arrests have been made and the case remains unsolved. It is the only unsolved homicide in Wakulla County. Authorities continue to seek information from the public to help solve the case. The Kilgore family has been vocal in their pursuit of justice, keeping the case in the public eye and urging anyone with information to come forward. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement has also shared appeals for assistance on social media, emphasizing the importance of community involvement in resolving this case. If you have any information related to George Jody Kilgore's murder, please contact the Wakulla County Sheriff's Office, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, Big Bend Crime Stoppers at 850-574-8477, or you can email us at whokilledgeorgekilgore@gmail.com.